Well, good morning, everybody. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you that you have called us by name through baptism and through your word, the incarnate Christ, to come near to you now through him. Lord, we pray that as we study your word and reflect upon the things that you did for your people to keep your promises, we pray that we will be encouraged by the word to know that you have kept your promises to us as well. That we may go forth and live lives of confidence and joy, knowing that you are with us, that you have redeemed us, and that you have a place prepared for us in heaven. Be with us now, Lord, and send us your Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, so we are on section 3. Before I begin, I guess I should probably mention that next week we will not be doing this Old Testament Bible study. We'll be doing a special little study, if you will, on the life of Luther, which is revealed through the various artifacts that came through a couple years ago at the Luther exhibit. So we'll have a PowerPoint presentation. We'll look at a number of these different artifacts and talk about them and try to relate them to not only the Christian faith, but the Reformation itself. And that's because next Sunday is Reformation Day. So with that little commercial out of the way, let's begin. Section 3, Isaac to Jacob. Abraham was getting old. His wife Sarah had already died. But before Abraham died, he made his servant promise to get a wife for Isaac. But not just any wife, she had to be a relative of Abraham's family. The servant obeyed and honored Abraham's request and went back to Abraham's homeland to find a wife for Isaac. God promised to help find a wife by showing the servant which woman would be the right wife for Isaac. The servant found her. Her name was Rebekah. There's a whole story about how it happened, about water in a well and all that, and we're not going to go into it. But it was a neat little story of how Rebekah was revealed to be the one. Shortly after she and Isaac married, Abraham died. Like Sarah, her mother-in-law, Rebekah could not have any children. Isaac prayed to God on behalf of his wife. God answered Isaac's prayers. And let's read about that in Genesis chapter 25, verses 21 to 28.
And Isaac prayed the Lord for his wife, because she was barren. And the Lord granted his prayer. And Rebekah, his wife, conceived. The children struggled together with her. And she said, If it is thus, why is this happening to me? So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, the older shall serve the younger. When her days to give birth were completed, behold, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy cloak. So they called his name Esau. Afterward, his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she was born. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man dwelling in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob.
Okay, thank you. Jacob and Esau were brothers. Although they were the twin sons of Isaac, they were very different. Esau was an outdoors kind of guy. He especially liked hunting. Jacob, on the other hand, was more of an indoor guy. He liked hanging around his father's tents and doing indoor stuff like cooking. Now, it is interesting that these twins, notice what it says back in verse 23. One shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger. We're going to see that play out later on. But I want you to recognize now that just because God knows what's going to happen, that doesn't mean he wants it to happen or intends for it to happen, or as so many Christians like to say these days, plans for it to happen. But just recognize that he knows it's going to happen. All right, we'll continue on with the handout here. Isaac favored his older son Esau because he was older and because he liked the same kinds of things that Isaac did. But Rebekah loved Jacob more because he's the baby, of course. One day Esau came in from a hard day of working and hunting and was hungry. He asked Jacob for some of the stew that he was cooking. Jacob saw this as an opportunity to get something from Esau that he wanted, his birthright. A birthright was the various rights that someone had by birth, like the right to inherit their father's property and to rule the family as its head. And of course, that birthright was always given to whom?
Firstborn.
Firstborn. That's right, the oldest. So that was their right as the oldest. So Jacob, because he wanted it, Jacob told Esau that he would only give him some stew if Esau would give his birthright to Jacob in exchange for Jacob's food. Esau didn't want to do it, but he was hungry, so he agreed to do it. Let's read chapter 25, verses 29 to 34.
Once when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was exhausted. And Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stew, for I am exhausted." Therefore his name was called Edom. Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright now." Esau said, "I am about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear to me now." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright.
All right, so notice that Esau's name, or at least that he got a nickname after that. What was Esau's nickname after that?
Edom.
Edom. Yeah, and if you've got some sort of study Bible there, it says red, which was, he ate red stew, he had red hair, and red. Not an uncommon nickname for people who have red hair. But what's interesting about that is Moses, who is the one writing this, God is the author, Moses is the writer. Moses is writing this because one of the enemies of God's people at the time Moses wrote were the Edomites, the descendants of Esau. So earlier when God was talking to Rebekah about what to expect, there were two nations at war within her womb. In fact, that is what happened. The descendants of Esau, or Edom, were enemies of the descendants of Jacob. The promise came through Isaac, not Ishmael, and the promise came through Jacob, not Esau. So we see the way that this promise is being fulfilled through very specific people. Now, it's not just all of Abraham's descendants are the ones through whom God will keep his promise. It's through Isaac and then through Jacob. So we see that happening here. And he despised his birthright. I don't know if this is just a matter of he was, it was one of those things like in sports, when one of your players goes to play for another team, suddenly you don't like him anymore because he's not yours anymore. I don't know if that's the case when it says that he despised his birthright, or if it's, as the Catechism refers to when it comes to God's name and his word, that we despise God and his word by not gladly hearing God's word and hearing it and living according to it. So a rejection of it. So maybe it's pointing out just simply that Esau sinned, I guess you could say, not necessarily against God, but by giving up his birthright. It's like, how could you? This is a precious gift that you are given, and you threw it away for some stew. So you despised it the way that people despise God's word when they refuse to come to church. I'm not sure in which way that phrase should be understood, but either way, it was a bad thing. All right, so soon after that incident happened, a famine spread across the land. Now let's turn to chapter 26, verses 2 through 6.
The Lord appeared to Isaac and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land where I tell you to live. Stay in the land for a while, and I will be with you and will bless you. For to you and your descendants I will give all these lands and will confirm the oath I swear to your father Abraham. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give them all these lands. And though your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed, because Abraham obeyed me and kept my requirements, my commandments, my decrees, and my laws."
Okay.
So Isaac
I'm sorry, go ahead, one more.
in Gerar.
Gerar. Just say with confidence and we'll all believe you. So Isaac settled in that land called Gerar. So here in this first part of the reading, we see, now the part that was left out was verse 1 where it says there was a famine. So in the land they were living, there was no food. They had to go somewhere else to find food. So they went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. I don't know why I didn't have that as one of the verses to read, but maybe I was just trying to keep it short. Anyway, so they're going to the Philistines, who we know later on are their mortal enemies. But now at this point, they're just another land to go to try to get food. And Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, will come up later. So keep that name in mind. Notice what God promised to Jacob here. Or I'm sorry, Isaac. Jacob comes later. What did he promise to Isaac? You don't have to list all of the things, just sum it up.
So increase the number of your descendants.
Yeah. Lots of kids, lots of land.
Keep the oath that he swore to Abraham.
Yeah, those promises that he made to Abraham, land, kids, cattle, and salvation, are all promises that he is now making to Isaac, his son. I promised it to your father, now I promise it to you. These are all things I will do for you. And God's motivation for doing it is because Abraham kept the covenant. You want to be part of the covenant? Here are the promises that I'm giving to you. But in order to remain in the covenant, here's what you have to do. And Abraham did. So he remained in the covenant, and Isaac was born into that covenant, and now the promises are for Isaac. And of course, the implication is Isaac needs to continue to remain in the covenant as well. Not to reject it and turn away from it, but to remain in it. Verses 12 through 16. God promised to bless them. Let's see how that happened.
And Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold. The Lord blessed him, and the man became rich and gained more and more until he became very wealthy. He had possessions of flocks and herds and many servants, so that the Philistines envied him. Now the Philistines had stopped and filled with earth all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham his father. And Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us, for you are much mightier than we."
All right, thank you. Going back to the handout. God blessed Isaac with so much wealth and property that his neighbors, the Philistines, the land in which he was living, they were afraid of him. So they asked him to move away because they feared what would happen if he ever decided to attack them. You know, at the beginning, when Adam and Eve sinned, there was a brokenness in relationships. And we see that here as well. Whenever somebody becomes rich and powerful, the people around them want to send them away because they're afraid they're going to attack them. It must have been rough to live in that kind of environment where you were always afraid of somebody conquering you and taking your stuff. It was quite a bit a matter of might makes right. Whoever has the largest army can do the most damage. And you can only possess as much as you can defend, which is one reason why they had lots of kids, so they could have an army, literally, to protect their own land. So as Isaac gains wealth and prosperity, they become afraid of him, which is, again, unfortunate that that's how people thought and maybe still do think. They're afraid of other people rather than trusting in their goodness, which I think we've seen time and time again. Maybe we shouldn't trust in human goodness. So Isaac took his whole family and moved to a place called Beersheba. God continued to bless them. Wherever they went, God blessed them. God renewed with Isaac the covenant he made with Abraham. And he said to Isaac, "I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I will bless you and increase the number of your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham." So again, the covenant is renewed with Abraham's son Isaac. All right, chapter 27, verses 1 to 4.
When Isaac was old and his eyes were dim so he could not see, he called Esau his older son and said to him, "My son," and he answered, "Here I am." He said, "Behold, I am old, I do not know the day of my death. Now then take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out in the field and hunt game for me. prepare for me a delicious food such as I love. Prepare for me and bring it to me so that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die.
Okay, so here is Isaac going to bestow on his son more than a birthright. It's a blessing from the father. And he intends to give that to Esau, not knowing that Esau has sold his birthright to his younger brother. Now, verse 5 says Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to his son Esau. And so Rebekah hatches a plan. She wants to see her favored son get this blessing from the father to make all of his sort of authority complete. He already has the birthright, now he would get the father's blessing. So she hatches a plan. Going back to the handout. When Rebekah found out that Isaac was planning to give Esau his blessing, she made a plan so that Jacob could get the blessing instead. She made some food, just the way Isaac liked it. Then she had Jacob put some goat hair on his arms so that when Isaac touched him, he would feel Esau. At least you would think so. Because Isaac had gone blind in his old age, and he used his sense of touch to see his sons. The plan worked. Isaac gave his blessing to Jacob, thinking it was Esau. Although Jacob already had the birthright, it wouldn't mean much without his father's blessing. That's why Jacob wanted both. And let's read about how that happened. Chapter 27, verses 26 to 29.
Then his father Isaac said to him, "Come near and kiss me, my son." So he came near and kissed him, and Isaac smelled the smell of his garments and blessed him and said, "See, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Let peoples serve you and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you."
All right, so there's the father's blessing. Prior to that, he had appeared to Isaac, Jacob had, and gave him some game, that had been hunted. So the father had every reason to believe that the one who he was blessing was Esau, his oldest son. But it wasn't, it was Isaac. Now, question. Was it wrong for Jacob to do what he did? What do you think?
Yeah,
Why?
because it originally was promised to Esau,
Okay.
so it actually was stealing.
Yeah. Anyone else?
He was being deceptive to his father.
Well, deceptive is a nice way of putting it. He flat out lied. Are you Esau? Yep, that's me. And it does say, excuse me, in a part that we skipped over, you sound like Jacob, but you smell and you feel like Esau. So he believed it was Esau. Yeah, it was wrong. He lied to his father. The birthright thing, I guess you could say he made a deal fair and square. But what he did to his father here was wrong. And yet we know that it was God's desire to bring about this plan through Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. So can we say that was evil, but it was part of God's plan? No. I'm going to answer for you before you do. No, don't say that. Because it's never God's plan that we sin. God works good in all things for those who love him, as it says in the New Testament. That's the kind of language we need to keep in mind. What Isaac did was wrong. What Jacob did. I get those two constantly mixed up. What Jacob did was wrong, but God worked through it to make good come out of it. God could have done things a different way, but this is the way that Jacob acted, and God used it for good. But that doesn't mean that God intended for Jacob to do that. And I just see that as a challenge to good Christian biblical theology all the time. When people make bad decisions, they make sinful choices. But in the end, it leads to good things, and so they'll say it was all part of God's plan. No, the sin that we commit is never part of God's plan. I can think specifically of a speaker that I heard a few weeks back where she had an abortion. And now she's very pro-life and she speaks out against it. And she said, well, God had a plan. You know, he more or less caused me or whatever. It was part of God's plan that I have the abortion so that I could, you know, have my eyes open and all this other stuff. And no, absolutely not. It was not God's plan that you do that. But God did find a way to work good out of something very bad. And so anyway, I just wanted to bring that up, that this is going to happen a lot in the Old Testament. We're going to see godly people do sinful things. That doesn't mean that it's okay. Just because they were godly people, they did it, it's in the Bible, so I guess it's okay for us to do it. Absolutely not. But God does find a way to work good in all things. That's going to come up again when we get to the story of Jacob and Rachel, which we'll get to shortly. But for now, we'll go back to the handout. When Esau found out what had happened, he was angry. So was Isaac, obviously. Genesis 28. This is a lengthy reading, verses 30 to 45. Just read some of it. I'll stop you after a little while, and then we'll keep going. So chapter 28. Well, wait a minute. 28, 30 to 45. Must be 30 to... Yeah. Maybe I meant 27. Yeah, it must be 27, 30 to 45. My mistake. Genesis 27, verses 30 to 45.
As soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, when Jacob was scarcely gone out from the presence of Isaac, his father Esau, his brother, came in from hunting. He also prepared delicious food and brought it to his father. And he said to his father, let my father arise and eat of his son's game, that you may bless me. His father Isaac said to him, who are you? He answered, I am your son, your firstborn, Esau. Then Isaac trembled very violently and said, who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? I ate it all before you came, and I have blessed him. Yes, and he shall be blessed.
All right, I'll stop you there for now. Notice Isaac's response. How did he feel about this?
Angry.
Yeah, to the point of trembling violently. He was very upset at what Jacob had done. And I think in Sunday school we sort of whitewash over it and act like, oh, you know, it happened, no big deal. Isaac was ticked. He was very upset at what his youngest son had done. And he said, I have blessed him. It's irrevocable, as we'll see in just a moment. He got the blessing. Even if he got it by deceit, he got it. Verse 34, if you want to keep reading, Emma, you can, or someone else can take over.
As soon as Esau heard the words of his father, he cried out with an exceedingly great and bitter cry and said to his father, bless me, even me also, O my father. But he said, your brother came deceitfully, and he has taken away your blessing. Esau said, is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has cheated me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he has taken away my blessing. Then he said, have you not reserved a blessing for me?
All right, I'll stop you there again. Sorry. Jacob has 2 different possible translations. Either he grabs by the heel, which is said to be true about Jacob, or he cheats. And so that's why Esau said, yep, you named him right. He's a cheater. Twice now he has cheated me. But is that true? He didn't cheat him the first time.
He gave it to him.
Yeah, that was a deal Esau made. He shouldn't have given up that, birthright, but he did. And Jacob didn't trick him. He made that decision of his own free will. Now again, what does this show us about our sinful natures?
We don't want to admit we're wrong.
It's not my fault. Man, I'd like to say this is with teenagers, but I think it's probably people of all ages. We make choices, we don't like the consequences, we blame somebody else for it. I didn't, I'll use my own son Jacob as an example, although he never was mad, but he didn't play very much his senior year of basketball. You know what else? He didn't work hard at all in the off season. He didn't shoot baskets, he didn't do free throws, he went to camps, but he just wasn't very good. He didn't work at it. We'll see if he actually watches these. I'll get a text message later today. But if he had said to me, it's so unfair, coach doesn't let me play, I'm being cheated or something, whatever. Is he really? No. He made choices. He chose not to work on his jump shot during the off season, and therefore he had none. But that's what we want to do, of course. When we make choices and we don't like the consequences that follow, we want to blame other people. My teenagers, I guess we'll see if Bella watches this either. My teenagers have been guilty of that. I don't know if you guys, when your children were kids, you saw the same thing in them or not, but maybe we see it in ourselves also. We don't like the consequences for our choices, and then we try to blame somebody else. In this case, Esau's like, he cheated me twice. No, he didn't. He cheated you once. The other one was your choice. So then he says, what about me? Do you have some blessing in reserve for me? Did you save anything for me? And what does Isaac say in verse 37? Emma, you can continue if you want.
Isaac answered and said to Esau, behold, I have made him lord over you, and all his brothers I have given to him for servants, and with grain and wine I have sustained him. What then can I do for you, my son?
Okay, I'm going to stop you once again, because notice the power of a person's word. They say it, and it has binding reality. I've already said it. I've said this blessing. I can't take it back. We talk about a man's bond is his word, or his word is his bond, or whatever. It's really interesting that he can't say, oh, I'm taking back that blessing because he cheated, he deceived me. Nope, it has been said. It is done. And in a really wonderful way, it ought to remind us of the blessings God has spoken over us. They can't be taken back. They were given to us for the sake of Christ, and his death and resurrection and ascension are final. Therefore, God cannot revoke his blessings from us because he's already spoken them through Christ. And everything he did was for Christ's sake. So God cannot and he will not revoke any of the blessings he's spoken over us, even when we don't deserve them. He still won't take them away from us. Just like Isaac couldn't take away the blessing that he had given to Jacob. So what can I do for you? I've already made him the master over you. What else is there for me to do for you? Okay, verse 38.
Esau said to his father, have you but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. Then Isaac his father answered and said to him, behold, away from the fatness of the earth shall your dwelling be, and away from the dew of heaven on high. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother, but when you grow restless, you shall break his yoke from your neck.
All right, we'll stop for just a second. Not much of a blessing. The fatness of the earth, in other words, that's where the prosperity is. That's the goodness, the bounty. Your dwelling is going to be away from that. So you don't get the rich, fertile land to grow all kinds of crops. And away from the dew of heaven, again, referring to the lushness of the land that will produce bountifully for Jacob. The blessing to Esau is you don't get to live there. You got to go somewhere else and live. And maybe by implication that means more desert lands, but by your sword you shall live, you shall serve your brother, but at some point you'll rebel. You'll renounce his lordship over you and you'll break free. Not much of a blessing. Doesn't say that you'll be set free. You'll have to break free on your own, which goes back to what was prophesied earlier about these two, is they're going to be constantly fighting. I don't know if I read this somewhere or not, but it's been said that Jacob and Esau basically are Jews and Muslims. I don't know if that's true. It's somewhere in the back of my brain. I don't know if it's something that I came up with or somebody else came up with, but it would explain a lot anyway, why there's such enmity between them even now today. All right, so there's still more to go. Verse 41. You want to keep going, Emma? Or you want to pass it off to someone else?
I'll pass it off.
All right, somebody want to take us the rest of the way? Verses 41 to 45.
Now Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are approaching, then I will kill my brother Jacob." But the words of Esau, her older son, were told to Rebekah. So she sent and called Jacob, her younger son, and said to him, "Behold, your brother Esau comforts himself about you by planning to kill you. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice. Arise, flee to Laban, my brother in Haran, and stay with him a while, until your brother's fury turns away, until your brother's anger turns away from you, and he forgets what you have done to him. Then I will send and bring you from there. Why should I be bereft of you both in one day?" Okay.
So, there's a lot of enmity there, hatred, and Rebekah finds out about it and says, "You got to get out of here." So when Jacob learned about his brother's rage, he fled to a faraway land to stay with one of his relatives. Along the way, God came to him in a dream while Jacob was sleeping in a field. Chapter 28, verses 10 to 15.
I have a comment.
Yes, please do.
Did you really think that Esau was ever going to forget how her brother, treated him? I find that hard to believe, that Esau's going to be like, it's fine, whatever.
Well, in time, maybe he would diminish enough that he wouldn't have a murderous rage. He might never forgive his brother or forget, but he may not choose to kill him.
Maybe.
Maybe. Well, we seem to think that works. Time will resolve certain things, but we also know people can hold grudges like crazy. So, but she must have believed that, she knew her sons better than we do, so she must have believed that eventually Esau would mellow, which she's proven correct, but at that time, we don't know that about him, but maybe she did. Let's see, where are we at? Oh, we were going to read verses 10 to 15, Jacob's ladder, as it's sometimes referred to.
Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran. And he came to a certain place and stayed there that night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, "I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land in which you lie I will give you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you."
All right, thanks. So once again, God confirms the covenant oath he made to Abraham and then to Isaac, now to Jacob. Why does God continually confirm oaths that he's already made? He's already made the promise. Why does he have to keep saying it over and over again? Or why does he choose to?
Just to remind them of what he's promised already, that, he's staying firm on what he's promised already, that nothing's gonna change.
Okay, he's affirming his faithfulness, that time has not caused it to diminish at all. Anyone else? Well, Emma and Tyson, you are the two in here that still have children that are young. How often do you tell your children you love them?
All the time.
You don't just tell them like the start of the week and assume that they'll know it the rest of the week?
No.
No, of course not. Although I've heard stories of some men, maybe in days gone by, that would never say they loved their wife or their children because they said it once. And that's enough. You should know. But no, we tell our children it all the time. Why?
So they don't forget.
Yeah. And it's especially important after they've messed up or maybe they've just failed at something, to be reminded they're valuable, they're precious, and they're loved. That there's nothing that has happened to change that since the last time you said it. Do we like to be told it constantly? I mean, I don't know if I can speak for children, but I think spouses like to be reminded that we're loved. And for the same reason that God told it constantly to his people, to keep that promise and that gracious love ever before them, so they never forget that they are loved by him. By the way, that affirmation of the covenant, that's gospel. Here is what I have promised to do for you, and I will do it. That's gospel. If you were in church earlier, that's the oath that God makes and keeps. And do we need to hear the gospel on a regular basis? Yeah, we obviously do. We're sinful, and we're often tempted to wonder if God could still love a sinner like us. And God continually tells us, yes, I do. Nothing's going to change that. I didn't touch on this during the sermon, but I thought it was interesting. Bartimaeus was a blind beggar, and that's how Luther liked to refer to himself, as a blind beggar in need of God's grace. He could do nothing on his own. He was completely reliant on Christ as the blind beggar, Bartimaeus. And of course, God, through Christ, has kept his promises and given every blessing that was promised. So, good news that God continually puts before us so that we can be reminded and refreshed by it. Comments? You don't have to wait for me to ask. You can interrupt anytime you want. All right, so that place, here's a sort of a trivia question. That place where Jacob slept and had that dream, do we know the name of the place?
Bethel.
Bethel. Yeah, I think it's in verse 19. He called the name of the place Bethel. Beth, or Beth, is the Hebrew word for house. And El is short for the word for God. Elohim would be the longer word. And it's not his divine name. It's just the name in general for God. You know, even false gods would have been Elohim because they're gods. So Bethel would be house of God. The divine name that identified the God of Israel was Yahweh. But El, short for Elohim, so it's house of God. This is the place where God dwells. All right, after that, Jacob built an altar in that place. He said that if God was going to be with him and watch over him, then the Lord was going to be his God. That was an important statement of belief to make at that time because there were so many other gods that people believed in. But Jacob professed that there was only one real, true God. To show that he wanted to be part of the same covenant that God made with Abraham and Isaac, he promised to give the Lord 1/10 of all that he had. This is what tithe means, 1/10 or 10%. Let's read about that in verses 18 to 22 of chapter 28.
Early the next morning, Jacob took a stone he had placed under his head, set it up in a pillar, and poured oil on top of it. He called that place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me, will watch over me on this journey I am taking, and will give my food to eat, clothes to wear, so that I can return safely to my father's house. Then the Lord will be with God. And this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house. And all things that you give me, I will give you 1/10.
Okay. If God will be with me and keep me in the way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my Father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. In that we see the order in which things happen. God blesses us first, we respond. Jacob says, if God does all this for me, I will respond. And that's what an offering is. It's our response to God. It's not in any way meant to achieve something or acquire something from God. He's already given us his blessings. This is our response to him. Now, as far as 10%, tithing, there has been some controversy about this in the church over the years. So let's have some controversy now, maybe. What are your thoughts? Are we obligated to give God 10%, or is tithing, literally 10%, only an Old Testament practice? What do you think? For those watching at home, nobody has said anything yet. You didn't miss anything. Well, everyone can.
Really?
It's okay to be wrong if you this is a safe place. Go ahead and offer an opinion. Steve?
Not really, because isn't there something in the New Testament too where the lady gave all she had and it was just 1 penny?
I think it was 2, but regardless, the amount doesn't matter. It was all she had. So you're saying, if I'm understanding you correctly, that tithing is not required of us now, as far as the 10% rule.
I guess so. I'm not quite sure.
Well, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth.
I think that, you talk about the churches that are more of the ones that if you pay us more, you'll get more. So there could, and I'm not referring this to St. Mark's, I'm just saying that there's people out there that believe that if they give the church, give God everything they have, it'll all come back to them tenfold, so they're, I think in a way tithing in some situations could be detrimental to some people because they keep paying to these churches, to these big churches, and they believe, and nothing's coming back to them really. And they get themselves in this deep hole, and then they start maybe moving away. I think if you can give something, whatever church you're in, give something. And just bless it, okay, I can give you $5 this week, that's what I have, that's what I can give to you this week. And just say, do with it what you can. You don't feel like you should be pressured to give more than you can really give. I understand too that sometimes you give more, you can get more back, but you shouldn't feel pressured to keep giving and giving and giving when you just aren't getting back. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Okay.
I think you're pointing out that some Christians give with the presupposition that they're going to get more back, that there's some sort of transaction here that the more I give, the more I get back. And in some cases, well, in every case that's true, but what are you getting back? Are you getting back blessings? Yes. Are you getting back financial and worldly things back? Not necessarily.
Like people paying more, tithing more to be healed by someone. The mega church, all those people that if I pay this much, if I give that much to God, I'll be healed by this person standing up there collecting my $1,000 check.
And it's interesting you say that, because is that when you're trying to give money to get something from God, it's no longer a response, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Now you're trying to bribe God,
right,
in a way. And certainly there are many televangelists and others like them that want people to believe that, because it ends up in their pocket.
They put a twist on it, like, you tithe more to me
Yeah.
than this.
Well, they won't say it's to me, but
Right,
when they're living in mansions
right.
and have, multiple
Planes
cars.
with runways,
What's that?
with planes with runways.
Yeah, private planes, their own runway.
But you're supposed to tithe joyfully too.
Yeah, but that's a response, which is what it's supposed to be. Not, okay, I'm going to do this because I want to get some back,
Right.
which is greed. It's like investing. If I put this money in this account, I'm going to get more back someday. Well, that's not what it's supposed to be. And it's not supposed to be a bribe to try to get God to do stuff for you. It's also not supposed to be a way of bribing God in a different way, but it seems a little bit more holy. You just feel guilty, and you want God to love you, so if you give him more money, how could he not love you more? And actually he won't, because that's not faith. That's law. That's you trying to earn something that you cannot possibly earn. So none of those things are good.
I know this has to do with Martin Luther, but like it kind of reminds me of back, this is for the Catholic Church, but how they would try to bribe people to pay as much as they can so they'd go to heaven. That's kind of the same deal as what we're kind of talking about, was what I was thinking of, that even.
I was thinking of the same thing, where the Pharisees
Yeah.
convinced them they could buy their way to heaven.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I try to avoid, is beating anybody over the head with financial stuff. It is supposed to be a response. So if you're going to give offerings, it ought to be because you really feel blessed and loved by God, not because I guilted you into it.
It's basically a thank offering.
Yeah.
Because Abel gave the best of everything he had, which he was showing thanks for what he did have.
He wasn't trying to bribe God or show off. He was happy. God was good. And so, Abel gave him an offering that reflected how grateful he was. You mentioned it earlier with the woman who gave all she had. She didn't give much, but it was all she had, and she gave it joyfully because she loved the Lord. Now again, that's not the pattern by which all of us should, live, is give all you have. That's not what God demands. But does he demand 10%? That was the original question. When you are deciding what to give as an offering, do you use 10% as a guide, or do you use some other number as a guide? Do you have to give 10%? That's what it was in the Old Testament. That was the expectation that became, well, that's what Jacob said he would do, and then after that it sort of became expected. But is that still expected of us by God today?
I would say kind of what Tyson said, just give as much as you can. Everyone, modern day, everyone's struggling at some point in their life, that you can't always give as much as you'd like, but to give as much as you can, to budget out what you can give each week or each month.
Well, and I don't think it's necessarily 10%, they just say give the first fruits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When you put a number or a percentage next to the offering, it automatically becomes law. And this isn't supposed to be law. It's a response to the gospel. So the answer, which some pastors will disagree with, but the answer is, no, you don't have to give 10%. The way that some people would word it is, you're free to give more. Which is true. You're free to give what you think is an appropriate offering to the Lord, without the church in any way judging it. And that's where I stand on that, is, we are commanded to give an offering to the Lord, because it's a thank offering. As Steve, were you the one who said that? Yeah, it's a thank offering. We are commanded to give him a thank offering. How much? That's up to us to decide how grateful we are to God. And it should be a cheerful thing. What good does it do if you give it grudgingly, like, ugh, I know I have to do this, or I know that the church needs a new furnace, so I got to put this in the plate, but I don't want to. You might as well keep it then, because the point of it is not to keep the church running. That's what God uses it for, but that's not the point of giving offerings. It's to give a thank offering to the Lord. It's to give thanks to Him. I think I've shared this before in Bible class. When I was young, and we gave our offerings on the plate, and they got brought up to the front of the church, do you remember what I said, how they were used? When I was a little kid, what did I think they did with the offerings? Do you remember me telling you this story before? I thought they took it out and behind there was an area behind this altar like we have here, where, different things were done back there. And I thought the money was brought back there and set on fire.
What?
It was an offering.
Oh.
I was a kid.
Sure.
I thought that's what they did with it. They took it back there and they burned it as an offering to the Lord. I was like 6. I didn't understand the role that the money played in keeping the church operations. I thought, this is what we're giving to the Lord, and now I burn it up to Him. Obviously, we don't really do that, but I just think it was interesting that as a kid, that's what I thought. That's what I thought the offerings were. I didn't make the connection. That's what keeps the lights on and the heat on and all of that. And you know what? We really shouldn't have that connection. We really should think of it as being to the Lord, and that's the end of it, as though it's burned up. We know that's not how it's used. But that's kind of how we should think of it, because that keeps us in the proper mindset. This is the Lord's. I'm giving this to the Lord. Not giving it to the church, not giving it to the pastor. It's giving it to the Lord. And then God, through His church, uses it to carry out the ministries of the church. When we lived in Baltimore, which is a high population of Baptists in the area, I thought it was interesting that when Tracy went to this Bible study, women's prayer group kind of thing, and they found out that she was married to a pastor, the women were like, oh, that must be nice. Because at least in that area, those pastors are wealthy. Easily well over $100,000 salaries. They're driving around, they get a Cadillac as their car. The church gives that to them. They may get their homes. They have very fancy clothing. It was a wealthy job to be a pastor if you were in some of these churches. I don't want to blame Baptists. It's not like it's a Baptist thing. But it was there in that area. So Tracy kept trying to convince them, we're not rich. But they could swear, you're a pastor's wife, you must be living in a big mansion. We lived in an apartment in Baltimore. It was a nice apartment, I'm not complaining. But we weren't living in any mansions. But that's where that money went in those communities. Anyway, I always thought that was kind of funny too, that people thought, oh, you're married to a pastor? Well, that must be nice. All right, anyway, let's...
Question.
Yes.
In verse 20 there, is there anything in His wording when it says, if God will be, we'll do all these things, then I will do such and such? Is He saying at all that, if God would end up not doing it, then He wouldn't, then He would renege on His part too at all? Or instead of saying since God will be with me and,
Well, that's a great question. And I think people could hear you, but just in case you were asking about what it says in verse 20, if God will be with me, how do we understand the word if? I know from enough study of the Bible that sometimes things don't translate really well, and so it's possible that it's not if like we think of if. But for the sake of argument, let's say it is. Is there anything wrong with that? If God reneges on His promises, do we have a right to just bail on Him?
This is a trick question.
Let me put it this way. I think a case can be made to argue either way.
Well, I think if God reneges on His promises to you, we should okay, fine then, later. You could be justified in saying that, I think. But maybe at the end of the day, you go, well, all right, well, God gave up on me, but I'm not going to give up on God. Thinking maybe you could convince God to, come back to what He promised you, maybe? I don't know.
Anyone else? How are we doing on time? We're getting close to the end here. We have more to cover. Holy smokes. That's okay.
It's not a right away promise, maybe. It might be, a promise for the future and ongoing thing.
So how does that answer the question? If God doesn't keep his promises, are we free to reject him? Go our own way?
You just have to be patient for that promise
Okay.
to come.
So what you're saying is, it's not going to happen. God's not going to renege on his promises. So you just be patient. Even when you think he has reneged, be faithful.
In due time.
Yeah. And of course that's a good Christian answer. But I'm asking the hypothetical, if God didn't keep his promises, could we leave him, so to speak? He's not our God anymore because he doesn't keep his promises.
Yes.
Well, Tyson says yes. Anyone else? Yes or no? As I said, a case can be made either way, so it's not like there is only one right answer. Someone who's normally here that isn't here today would say no, because he's God. And whether he keeps his promises or not, he's God. And you owe it to him as the king to serve him, because he's king. Even if he's an unfaithful king, he's still the king. So there's that point that could be made. Yep, he still is creator God. We still have to obey him. That would be one argument. I like the position that Tyson took. If he's not faithful to us, we're not obligated to be faithful to him. Other than, obviously, the law, because he's king. But the reason why I can say that is because he is faithful. There's no question. None of us have any doubt that God is faithful to his word. He keeps his promises. So that means for us, we have to obey him and trust him, because he is our God. And he'll never stop being our God. But if he ever did, we could turn away from him, which is why he doesn't ever turn away from his promises. Later on, when God says, I'm going to wipe all these people out because they worship the golden calf. If he wipes them all out, he says, I'll start over through you, Moses. In other words, the covenant to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is done. Moses told him he can't do it. Because who's going to worship a God they can't trust? You made a promise, you've got to keep it. And he literally used the word repent. You have to repent. Not because God had sinful thoughts, but because he needed to change the direction he was going. God said, you know what, I've done it before, I'll do it again. I'll start over with you. And Moses said, you can't. You've got to keep your promise, or people aren't going to trust you. Who's going to follow a God that can't be trusted? And so God relented and continued to keep his promise. He punished them, but he didn't wipe them all out, because God is faithful. And so when Jacob says, if God's going to be with me and do all these things, I think there is a sense that he believes it will be the case. If God's going to do all this for me, then yeah, of course I'm going to worship him. And he proves it by setting up that pillar. God hasn't kept all of these promises yet, but Jacob believes that he will. So he goes ahead and responds by promising to give a tenth, and then setting up this pillar to be the place marked as God's house. Any closing thoughts on tithing? Or anything related to that, I guess? Well, when I was in Baltimore at a very small inner city church, and the money was always tight. Matter of fact, currently they're being served by a pastor that they don't even pay. He's a military veteran. He has a good pension from that. The church gives him some money when they can, but basically he's working for them for free because he can live off of the pension that he has. Wonderful, godly man. Thanks be to God for him. When I had left there, and I wasn't called there. I was their vacancy pastor for about a year. And when it was time for me to leave, they hadn't called another pastor yet, so there was a lot of fear about what the future held for them. I was leaving because I had accepted a call to go to Nebraska and teach there. So I was leaving them without a pastor. And so at this going away party that they had, Pastor, how do we keep going? How do we get money from people to keep going? And I said, preach the gospel. Don't ever fall into the trap of thinking you have got to guilt people into giving money to the church. because that's not what it's about. Offerings are to the Lord, and they are thank offerings for what God has done. So if you want to increase giving, increase the gospel. Continue telling people how good God is, and let His Spirit do the rest. And so, that's what I think for us as well, that occasionally we have to talk about offerings and sacrifices and that kind of stuff to the Lord, the law aspect of it, because that's what comes up in the text. But hopefully you always know that your offerings are your response to the Lord as a way of thanking Him for everything He's done for you. And the Lord most certainly has been good to us. So, thanks be to God. Amen. Next week, I'll have a projector and a screen set up, probably in here. Somehow, I will find room for it, and we'll talk about the life of Luther through the different artifacts that we have found from him. Have a good week, everybody. God bless.